The chamber was massive. It stretched so far that the walls seemed to fade into darkness. Thousands of beings filled the space, each one different from the next. Some had scales that glimmered like jewels. Others floated in containment fields filled with colored gas. A few were just lights, pure energy contained in geometric shapes. This was the Galactic Assembly, and Haiyan-Wu had learned to hate every moment he spent inside it. He stood at the human podium, a small platform that seemed even smaller in this enormous room. His dark suit looked plain compared to the exotic forms around him. His aide Ji-Wan stood beside him, her tablet ready, her face carefully neutral. They had practiced this expression many times. Never show anger. Never show hurt. Just present the facts and wait. Haiyan-Wu had been doing this for 20 years. 20 years of presenting human concerns to beings who barely looked at him. 20 years of watching other species receive help while humans were told to wait. 20 years of being treated like children at a table of adults. Today was different, though. Today, people were dying. Honored members, Haiyan-Wu began, his voice carried by the translation fields that filled the chamber. I come before you with an urgent request. The human colonies in the outer verge are under attack. The Krell swarm has destroyed 3 settlements already. 15,000 humans are dead. Another 40,000 are trapped on worlds that will fall within weeks. He paused. Some of the beings in the chamber shifted. A few made sounds that the translators interpreted as concern. Most simply stared with whatever they used for eyes. We invoke the Mutual Defense Compact, Haiyan-Wu continued. Article 7 clearly states that any member species facing invasion by hostile forces can request military aid. We are making that request now. We need ships. We need weapons. We need help. The presiding council, a group of 7 beings from the oldest species in the assembly, conferred among themselves. Haiyan-Wu had seen this before. They would discuss. Then they would debate. Then they would delay. One of the council members, a crystalline being called Thoramvex, spoke. Its voice sounded like wind chimes. The human situation is noted. We must consider all factors. The Krell are numerous. Intervention could escalate the conflict. Other borders might be weakened. We must be cautious. People are dying now, Haiyan-Wu said, keeping his voice level. Every day we delay, more colonies fall. The compact exists for situations exactly like this. Another council member responded, this one a floating sphere of blue light. The compact was designed for threats to assembly stability. The outer verge is far from central territories. Human colonies chose to settle in dangerous regions. Risk was assumed. Guwan's hand tightened on her tablet. Haiyan-Wu saw it but kept his own expression calm. They had heard this logic before. When humans asked for trade agreements, they were told they hadn't proven their economic value. When they asked for technology sharing, they were told they weren't advanced enough. When they asked for anything, there was always a reason to say no. We are members of this assembly, Haiyan-Wu said quietly. We pay our contributions. We follow the laws. We ask only for what the compact promises. The debate began. It would last for weeks, Haiyan-Wu knew. Representatives from hundreds of species would speak. They would discuss threat assessment. They would analyze resource allocation. They would debate the philosophical implications of intervention. And while they talked, humans would die. He had sat through these debates before. He had listened to hours of discussion about mining rights, trade routes, and territorial disputes. He had watched the assembly send fleets to protect species they valued. The Vaix telepaths received help within days when raiders threatened their worlds. The Nephra gas dwellers got massive aid to rebuild after a natural disaster. But humans? Humans always had to wait. Days passed. Haiyan-Wu presented evidence of the attacks. Ji-Wan showed footage of destroyed colonies, of families running from Krell warriors, of ships burning in orbit. Some assembly members expressed sympathy. They made sad sounds. They offered thoughts and prayers and well wishes. But votes? Action? That required more consideration. 2 weeks into the debate, Haiyan-Wu received a message from the human colonies. Another settlement had fallen. 20,000 more dead. The survivors were evacuating to the last fortified world in the sector, a place called Hope's End. The name felt appropriate. He brought this news to the assembly. More discussion followed. Some representatives suggested sending observers to document the situation. Others proposed a fact-finding mission to verify the threat level. A few suggested that humans might be exaggerating to gain military advantages. That suggestion made Hyun-woo close his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his expression hadn't changed. But something inside him had 3 weeks. That's how long the debate lasted. 3 weeks of speeches and counter-speeches, of procedural questions and committee assignments. Finally, the vote came, the chamber filled with displays showing each species' choice. Green for yes, red for no, yellow for abstain. Hyun-woo watched the colors appear. More red than green. Too much yellow. The vote failed. Aid was denied. The official reason was complex. Not enough strategic value. Resources needed elsewhere. Risk of escalation too high. The human colonies would receive thoughts of support and wishes for their safety. But no ships. No weapons. No help. Hyun-woo stood at his podium and looked across the massive chamber. Thousands of beings went on with their business. Some were already discussing the next agenda item. Others talked among themselves about unrelated matters. The human crisis was over as far as they were concerned. The vote was done. He reached down and closed his briefing folder. The sound was small in that huge space, but Ji-won heard it. She looked at him, question in her eyes. "Pack up," he said softly. She understood immediately. Together they began gathering their materials. Tablets, documents, recording devices. All the tools of diplomacy that had proven worthless. Around them, the assembly continued its session. A dispute about mining rights in the Gamma sector. A trade disagreement between two species whose names Hyun-woo had never bothered to learn. Important matters, surely. Just not matters involving humans. He picked up his case and stepped down from the podium. Ji-won followed. They walked toward the exit, their footsteps silent on the smooth floor. No one stopped them. No one asked where they were going. No one seemed to notice at all. At the door, Hyun-woo turned back one last time. He looked at his podium, at the human section that had seemed so important when he first arrived 20 years ago. He looked at the council, at the thousands of species that made up this grand assembly. Then he turned and walked out behind him. The assembly continued its business. Voices rose and fell. Debates echoed through the chamber. The great work of galactic civilization went on, but humanity's voice had fallen silent, and in that silence, something new began to grow. The news reached Earth 6 days after Hyun-woo walked out of the assembly chamber. It spread quickly through human space, jumping from world to world through the quantum communication networks. The assembly had refused. The colonies were on their own. There were no riots. No mass protests. No angry speeches broadcast across the networks. Instead, something quieter happened. Something more dangerous. People got to work. Captain Minho stood on the bridge of the warship Defiant, watching the shipyards of Luna orbit through the main viewport. He had served in the defense fleet for 15 years, mostly running patrols and escorting merchant ships. Boring work, but necessary. Now everything was changing. "Captain," his executive officer said, "we're receiving new orders from Fleet Command." Minho read them quickly. His ships were to proceed immediately to the outer verge, not to wait for assembly support. Not to request permission. Just go, protect the colonies. Use whatever force necessary. "Helm," he said, "plot a course. Maximum speed. Signal the rest of the squadron." 12 ships broke orbit together. They were joined by others. Vessels from Mars, from the Titan shipyards, from stations scattered across human space. No grand announcements. No declarations of war. Ships simply moved, converging on the endangered colonies, like antibodies rushing to an infection, but ships alone wouldn't be enough. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a facility that didn't appear on any official maps, Dr. Yunji walked through corridors that hummed with power. The Prometheus Research Initiative had existed since humans first joined the assembly. Its purpose was simple: develop technologies that might be needed if humanity ever stood alone. That day had arrived. "Show me the weapons," Yunji said to her lead engineer, the engineer. A young man named Doyun pulled up holographic displays. "We have 3 primary systems ready for deployment. First, the kinetic impactors, magnetic accelerators that can launch projectiles at 0.3 light speed. Impact force equivalent to nuclear weapons, but with no radiation signature." "The assembly would consider those barbaric," Yunji noted. "The assembly isn't here," Doyan replied. Yunji smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Continue." "Second, we have the swarm nanits, self-replicating machines that can disassemble organic matter at the molecular level. We can program them to target specific DNA structures, in this case Krell biology. And third, quantum disruption fields. The Krell use telepathy to coordinate their swarm. We can jam that connection. Make them deaf and blind to each other." Yunji studied the data. These weapons had been theoretical for years. The assembly had strict rules about what weapons were acceptable. Energy weapons that gave targets time to surrender. Projectile weapons that could be defended against. Nothing too efficient? Nothing too permanent? "Begin production," Yunji said. "All facilities. Maximum output." "Ma'am, the assembly regulations don't apply to species they abandon," Yunji finished. "Get it done?" Across human space, the transformation accelerated. Civilian shipyards that built merchant vessels retooled their assembly lines. Factory stations that produced consumer goods switched to military production. Mining colonies increased output, feeding raw materials into the growing war machine, and people volunteered. Millions of them. On the colony world Artemis 7, Commander Soyin organized the defense. Her world was next in the Krell's path. Intelligence said they would arrive in 2 weeks. She had 5,000 trained soldiers and another 20,000 civilians who had never held a weapon. "How many of the civilians can fight?" her lieutenant asked. "All of them," Soyin replied. "We start training tomorrow. Everyone who can carry a gun will carry one. Everyone else will build fortifications, run supplies, or care for the wounded. They're farmers and merchants, not soldiers." Soyin looked at her lieutenant. "They're humans. That's enough." The training began at dawn. Farmers learned to fire rifles. Teachers learned to operate anti-aircraft guns. Children too young to fight learned to run messages and tend the wounded. No one complained. No one asked if help was coming from the assembly. They already knew the answer. Meanwhile, something else happened. Something the assembly wouldn't notice for months. Human outposts in alien territories began closing. Scientists working in VAX research facilities packed their equipment and left. Merchants in Thorum trade stations settled their accounts and departed. Cultural exchange programs ended. Students came home. It happened quietly. No announcements. No explanations. Humans simply withdrew from assembly space like water receding before a tsunami. Ambassador Hyunwoo, back on Earth for the first time in years, met with President Hana. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for making hard decisions. "The assembly is receiving reports of human withdrawals," Hana said. "They're starting to ask questions." "Let them ask," Hyunwoo replied. "We don't owe them explanations. Some species are protesting. They claim we have contractual obligations. We'll honor all contracts. Pay all debts. Then we're done." Hyunwoo looked out the window at the city beyond. "We spent 50 years trying to fit into their system. Following their rules. Seeking their approval. Where did it get us?" Hannah nodded slowly. "The people are behind us. Support for withdrawal is over 90%. Even those who wanted closer assembly ties are changing their minds. Because they finally see the truth," Hyunwoo said. "We were never partners. We were pets. Cute little humans who might be useful someday, but never equals. So what now? Now we prove we don't need them. 6 weeks after the assembly vote, Captain Minho's fleet arrived at Hope's End. The colony was under siege. Krell ships surrounded the planet, bombarding defensive positions. On the ground, millions of refugees huddled in shelters. All ships, Minho broadcast, arm weapons. Prepare for combat. Remember, the Krell don't take prisoners. Neither do we. The human fleet attacked. Not with the cautious tactics the assembly preferred. Not with warning shots and demands for surrender. They came in fast and hard, weapons firing before the Krell could react. Kinetic impactors ripped through Krell ships. The impacts were devastating. Ships that had been thought impenetrable shattered like glass. The Krell swarm tried to adapt, tried to coordinate a defense. Then the quantum disruption fields activated. Suddenly, the Krell couldn't hear each other. Their telepathic network went silent. Individual ships found themselves alone, cut off from the swarm intelligence that guided them. They panicked. Minho watched the battle unfold with cold satisfaction. Deploy the nanites. Target their largest ships. The swarm nanites spread through space like invisible fog. When they touched Krell vessels, they went to work. Hulls began to dissolve. Organic components broke down. Within minutes, ships that had survived the initial attack simply fell apart. The Krell tried to retreat. Minho didn't let them. Pursue, he ordered. Leave none. It wasn't mercy. It was calculation. Every Krell that escaped would report back to their queen. Better to make this lesson absolute. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the Krell attack fleet was gone, completely. Not a single ship escaped. On Hope's End, Commander Soyen watched the orbital battle from her command post. When the last Krell ship exploded, her soldiers began to cheer. She didn't join them. Instead, she activated her communication link. Captain Minho, this is Soyen. The ground forces are ready. Send down the coordinates of any remaining Krell positions. We'll handle cleanup. Understood. Commander, you should know more Krell forces are 3 weeks out. This was just the first wave. Then we have 3 weeks to prepare. Soyen out. She turned to her soldiers. The cheering had stopped. They were watching her, waiting. Get back to work, she said. This isn't over. Not even close. We've got 3 weeks to turn this planet into a fortress. Move. They moved. Across human space, the response was the same. No celebrations. No declarations of victory. Just grim preparation for what came next. The assembly had remained silent when humanity needed them. Now humanity would rise on their own terms. The Krell Queen Mine had existed for 3,000 years. It had consumed 17 species and conquered 42 worlds. Its swarm numbered in the millions. It had never known defeat. That changed in 6 months. Captain Minho stood on the bridge of his flagship, now called Retribution, and watched another Krell hive ship die. The massive vessel, large as a small moon, broke apart under sustained kinetic bombardment. Millions of Krell died in moments. He felt nothing. That's the last of their heavy units in this sector, his tactical officer reported. The remaining ships are retreating toward the core worlds. Let them run, Minho said. Send word to the ground forces. Begin final operations. On 12 Krell-occupied worlds, human forces descended. These weren't the defensive battles of the early war. This was extermination. Commander Soyen led the assault on the largest Krell colony, a world they called Hive 7. The fighting was brutal. The Krell fought desperately, knowing no mercy would come. They were right. Human soldiers moved through the hive complexes with weapons that the assembly would have banned instantly. Flamers that burned at temperatures hot enough to melt stone. Sonic disruptors that liquefied organic tissue. Chemical agents that Soyen didn't even have names for. Sir, one of her lieutenants said, there are Krell young in this chamber, non-combatants. Soyen looked at the lieutenant. He was young, new to combat. Still thought like the old world, when humans followed assembly rules about proportional response and civilian protection. The Krell don't have non-combatants, she said quietly. Every one of them is part of the swarm. Every one will grow into a warrior. Clear the chamber. The lieutenant hesitated, then nodded. The work continued. 3 weeks later, the last Krell stronghold fell. The Queen Mind, desperate and alone, broadcast a message across all frequencies. The translators made her thoughts into words. We surrender. We beg, we will retreat. We will never return. Please. The message reached Earth, it reached the fleet. It reached every human commander in the field. The response was silence, not because humans were cruel, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they had learned a lesson from the assembly. Some threats needed to be ended completely. Captain Minho gave the final order. Deploy the planet crackers. The weapons were another gift from Dr. Youngji's research teams. Massive devices that burrowed to a planet's core and triggered chain reactions in the mantle. The Krell homeworld shook. Then it split. Then it died. The Queen Mind's final scream echoed through space for a moment. Then it fell silent. The war was over. The Krell swarm, which had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, no longer existed. Not defeated, not scattered, erased. News of the victory spread. It reached the assembly within days. The response was not what humanity expected. A delegation from the Vaix consensus arrived at human border stations, requesting an urgent meeting. Admiral Jinho, who commanded the Terran defense perimeter, received them in a sterile conference room. No hospitality. No warmth. Just business. The Vaix were telepaths, beings of pure thought given form. Their representative, a shifting pattern of light and energy, spoke directly into Jinho's mind. We come with congratulations on your victory. The Krell were a menace to all species. The Assembly wishes to discuss your weapons technologies. They are most impressive. Jinho raised one hand. Stop, don't speak in my mind. Use words like everyone else. The Vax seemed surprised but complied, using a translation device. My apologies. We meant no offense. As I said, we wish to discuss. No, Jinho said simply. I'm sorry? No discussion. No technology sharing? No meetings with Assembly representatives. We're done with the Assembly. The Vox flickered with what might have been confusion. But surely you want to return to the galactic community. We can offer much. Trade agreements. Technology exchanges, recognition. We don't need your recognition, Jinho replied. We asked for help when our people were dying. You debated for 3 weeks and then said no. That told us everything we needed to know about the galactic community. But that was a complicated situation. It was simple. We were members. We needed help. You refused. Now we don't need you. Jinho stood. This meeting is over. Return to assembly space. Don't come back. The Vax delegation left, confused and disturbed. They had never been dismissed so completely before. On Earth, President Hana addressed humanity through the internal networks. Not the galactic channels. Those connections had been severed. People of Earth and all human worlds, she began. 6 months ago, the Assembly abandoned us. They left us to die because we weren't important enough to save. We survived because we saved ourselves. We won because we fought with every weapon, every tactic, every advantage we could create. She paused, looking directly at the camera. Some of you may wonder if we'll rejoin the Assembly now, if we'll seek their approval again. The answer is no. We are done asking permission. We are done following their rules. We are done pretending we need their validation. From this day forward, humanity walks its own path. We will help those who need it. We will trade with those who deal fairly. We will defend ourselves against any threat. But we will never again bow to the Assembly. They remained silent when we needed them. Now we will remain apart because we choose to. The speech was short. No flowery language. No diplomatic hedging. Just clear, simple truth, and across human space, the transformation continued. The colonies that had suffered under Krell attack began rebuilding, but differently now. Heavier defenses, more weapons. Every settlement became a fortress. Every citizen trained for combat. Humanity had learned that survival meant being ready for anything. Dr. Yunji's research facilities expanded. New projects began, each more ambitious than the last. She stood in her office one day, reviewing reports, when her assistant Doyon entered. "Ma'am, we're receiving complaints from Assembly scientific observers. They're monitoring our activities and expressing concerns about several projects." "What kind of concerns?" "The stellar engineering project in the Sirius system. They say it's dangerous. The artificial intelligence research stations. They say we're violating safety protocols. The genetic modification programs. They say—" "Let me stop you," Yunji interrupted. "Do these observers have any authority over human space?" "No, ma'am. But they're citing assembly regulations, which don't apply to us anymore." "Ignore them. If they continue to spy on our facilities, have Admiral Junho escort them out of human territory." Doyon hesitated. "Ma'am, this is going to anger the assembly." "Good," Yunji said. "Maybe they'll finally understand. We're not their junior partners anymore. We're not their students. We're not their problem to manage. We're just done with them." Across the galaxy, species that had commercial relationships with humanity began feeling the impact. Agricultural worlds that had exported food to human colonies found their contracts expired and not renewed. Medical companies that had sold treatments to humans discovered their products were no longer needed. Humans had developed their own better versions. Entertainment became the strangest loss. Human music, art, literature, and cultural products had become surprisingly popular in assembly space. Despite looking down on humans politically, many species enjoyed their creative output. Now that content stopped flowing. No more human movies. No more human music. No more human stories. Some species barely noticed. Others protested. A few tried to steal the content through illegal channels. Human response was swift digital warfare that made the Assembly's cybersecurity experts look like children. The thieves found their systems locked, their data wiped, their networks compromised. The message was clear. Humanity was done being taken for granted. In the Assembly chamber, representatives gathered to discuss the human situation. The debate lasted for weeks. Some argued for reconciliation. Others suggested sanctions. A few proposed military intervention. That last suggestion was quickly abandoned when intelligence reports arrived. Human military capabilities had grown exponentially. Their fleet sizes had tripled. Their weapons technology had advanced beyond anything the Assembly could match. And most concerning, their shipyards were still expanding. Humanity wasn't preparing to rejoin the Assembly. They were preparing to surpass it, and they were succeeding. 20 years passed like water flowing downhill, steady, inevitable, changing everything in its path. The galaxy was not the same place it had been when Haiyan Wu walked out of the assembly chamber. The careful peace that the assembly had maintained for centuries was cracking. The galactic core, that ancient heart of civilization, was becoming unstable. Stars flickered and died earlier than they should. Spatial anomalies appeared without warning. And species that had lived in the deep core for millennia were fleeing outward. They brought war with them. The assembly tried to maintain order. They negotiated. They mediated. They created committees to study the problem. But refugees kept coming. And they needed resources, worlds, food, safety. The species already occupying those worlds didn't want to share. Wars erupted along the spiral arm. Small conflicts at first. Border disputes, resource arguments, then larger ones. Entire sectors burning as desperate refugees fought established powers. The assembly debated endlessly. They created peace initiatives. They sent observers. They wrote strongly worded resolutions. Nothing worked. And then refugees started appearing at human border stations. Commander Taiyong, who now led humanitarian operations, stood in the command center watching the screens. 12 ships full of refugees, species he didn't recognize, were requesting emergency assistance. They were dying. Life support failing. Food running out. Children suffering. "Sir," his aide said, "they're requesting entry to human space. They say they have nowhere else to go." Taiyong studied the data. These weren't soldiers, not invaders. Just people who had lost everything. Women and children mostly. The elderly. The wounded. Deny entry? He said. His aide looked shocked. Sir, deny entry to human space? But deploy medical ships. Full emergency response. Supplies, repairs, medical care. Everything they need? I don't understand. Taeyong pulled up a map of nearby space. Here, this nebula. It's uninhabitable for most species, but we can make it work. Send construction ships. Build stations. Create a safe zone. Full infrastructure life support, food production, medical facilities. Give them a place to survive? That's going to be expensive, sir. We can afford it. But they don't enter human space. The assembly made it clear other species' problems aren't our responsibility. We'll help them survive. We'll give them shelter, but outside our borders. The aide nodded slowly, understanding. Because if we let them in, more will come. And eventually we'll be responsible for the entire galaxy's refugees. Exactly. Help without entanglement. Charity without obligation. The assembly way taught us that lesson well. Within days, human construction ships arrived at the nebula. They worked with frightening efficiency. Stations rose from nothing. Habitats formed in the void. Food production began. Medical centers opened. The refugees arrived to find a fully functional settlement waiting for them. They were grateful. They were also confused. Why would humans help but not allow them closer? Why save them but keep them at arm's length? Commander Taeyong explained it simply to their leaders. We will help you survive. We will give you the tools to rebuild. But we will not become responsible for your future. That is yours to shape. More refugees came. More safe zones were established. Humanity's border became ringed with settlements that existed in a strange space, not human territory, but under human protection. Not members of the assembly, but not abandoned either. The assembly watched this with growing concern. Meanwhile, humanity's expansion continued. But it wasn't expansion through conquest or colonization of inhabited worlds. Instead, humans went to places no one else wanted. Dr. Yuna, who had taken over the research initiative after Dr. Yunji's retirement, led projects that made even human engineers nervous. She stood in an observation station watching. A Dyson swarm take shape around a young star. The power output will exceed all of human civilization's current needs by a factor of 1,000, her chief engineer reported. Then we'll find uses for it, Yuna said. How many more stars are scheduled for harvesting? 17 in the next 10 years? And the assembly is filing protests. They claim we're disrupting natural stellar development. Yuna laughed. Not a happy sound? Natural stellar development? As if stars care about our politics. Tell the assembly that we're working in unclaimed systems. No one owned these stars. No one was using them. We are. End of discussion. But it wasn't just stars. Human settlements appeared in regions the assembly considered impossible. Inside nebulae where radiation should have killed any life. Orbiting black holes where gravity should have torn stations apart. In the coronas of unstable stars where temperatures were measured in millions of degrees. Human technology had advanced to the point where impossible was just another problem to solve. The terraforming operations were particularly impressive. Worlds that the assembly had surveyed and declared uninhabitable were transformed in years. Atmospheres were constructed. Oceans were seeded. Ecosystems were engineered from scratch. Within a generation, these dead rocks became gardens. And humans kept expanding. Not aggressively. Not militarily. They just spread like water, finding every crack and crevice, filling spaces no one else could occupy. The assembly sent another delegation, this time to a human world called New Horizon, a planet that had been a barren rock 50 years ago and was now a thriving agricultural center. The delegation was led by representatives from 3 major species: the Vox telepaths, the Thorum crystalline collective, and the Nefer gas dwellers. They met with the planetary governor, a woman named Jisu. "We come with questions," the Vox representative said, using a translator this time. "Your expansion is unprecedented. Your technology advances beyond our understanding. We wish to understand how." Jisu smiled politely. "Why? To learn. To share knowledge. The Assembly has always believed in collective advancement. The Assembly," Jisu interrupted, "spent centuries learning from each other while keeping humanity at the children's table. You shared technology among yourselves, but never with us. Now you want to know our secrets?" The Thorum representative spoke, its voice like crystals ringing together. "That was an error. We acknowledge this. But surely you see the benefit of cooperation." "We do," Jisu agreed. "That's why we trade with species who deal fairly. We share medical technology with those who need it. We even protect refugees from wars we didn't start. But we don't share military technology. We don't explain our research. And we don't rejoin the Assembly. But why?" the Nifra asked, its gas form swirling in agitation. "You have clearly surpassed us in many ways. You could lead the Assembly, shape policy, guide the galaxy." Jisu leaned back in her chair. "Let me tell you a story. 20 years ago, human colonies were under attack. We asked the Assembly for help. The response was debate, delay, and ultimately refusal. While you talked, 15,000 humans died. We learned something important that day." "What?" the Vagues asked. "That we're better off alone." "But you're not alone," the Thorum pointed out. "You help refugees. You trade with many species. You maintain diplomatic relations with dozens of governments." "True," Jisu acknowledged. "But we're not part of your Assembly. We don't follow your rules. We don't ask your permission. We act according to our own judgment and live with the consequences." The delegation tried different arguments. They offered trade benefits, technology exchanges, cultural programs. Nothing worked. Jisu was polite but firm. Humanity's answer was no. As the delegation prepared to leave, the Vax made one final attempt. "You do realize that many species fear you now? Your military strength, your rapid expansion, your technological superiority, it makes others nervous." "Good," Jisu replied. "Fear keeps people honest. The Assembly never feared us before. They dismissed us, ignored us, left us to die. Now they're afraid we might do the same to them. That's progress." After the delegation departed, Jisu contacted Earth. President Hana, now elderly but still sharp, listened to the report. "They're getting desperate," Hana observed. "The core instability is getting worse. Wars are spreading. They need our help. Should we offer it?" "No, let them struggle. Let them debate. Let them learn what it means to face problems their committees can't solve. We'll help innocents caught in the chaos." "But the Assembly itself? They can figure things out on their own?" Across human space, the sentiment was the same. Humanity had moved on. They built. They created. They expanded. But they didn't look back to the Assembly for approval or guidance. They had learned to rise on their own, and they discovered they preferred it that way. 50 years after Haiyan Wu walked out of the Assembly chamber, reality broke. It started at the galactic core. Space itself began tearing. Not metaphorically. Actually tearing. Holes appeared in the fabric of existence, and through those holes came things that shouldn't exist. Creatures made of angles that hurt to look at. Ships that moved in directions that had no names. Weapons that killed by unmaking the concept of life itself. The Assembly called them the Void Incursion. Humanity, hearing the reports, called them what they were. Demons from another dimension. And they were winning. The great powers of the Assembly tried to fight. The VX telepaths attempted to communicate with the entities. Their minds shattered. The crystalline Thorum calculated perfect battle strategies. The entities ignored physics. The Nephara deployed their massive fleet, ships that had protected 100 worlds. The fleet simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but unmade. Entire sectors fell into non-space. Billions died. The assembly, which had governed the galaxy for thousands of years, was helpless. In the assembly chamber, now only half full as species fled or perished, the presiding council made a decision. They sent messages to human space. Not diplomatic overtures. Not trade offers. Just 3 words repeated over and over: help us, please. For 3 weeks, there was silence from humanity. The assembly grew desperate. More messages. More pleas. Some angry. Some begging. All ignored. Then the human fleets arrived. Grand Admiral Kiwu commanded. The largest war fleet any species had ever assembled. 5,000 ships. Not the defensive vessels humanity had maintained 50 years ago. These were warships built with technology the assembly couldn't understand. Each one could destroy a planet. Together, they could reshape star systems, but they didn't come to save the assembly. They came for the innocents. Kiwu stood on the bridge of his flagship, Absolute, watching the tactical displays. Red zones marked where reality had broken. Orange zones showed areas under attack. Yellow zones indicated refugee concentrations. All ships, he broadcast, begin rescue operations. Ignore military installations. Ignore assembly infrastructure. Focus on civilian populations. Extract and evacuate to the safe zones we've prepared. The fleet split into dozens of task forces. They descended on worlds where reality was breaking, where entities from the void were consuming everything. Human soldiers fought not to win territory but to buy time. Time for families to reach evacuation points. Time for children to board rescue ships. Time for the old and wounded to escape. It was brutal work. The void entities didn't die easily. Conventional weapons were useless. But humanity had learned much in 50 years of isolation. They had studied dimensions, bent physics, created weapons that could harm things that technically didn't exist, reality anchors deployed, massive devices that forced normal physics on areas where reality had broken. The void entities screamed, a sound that translated across dimensions as pure wrongness. But it worked. They became vulnerable. And when they became vulnerable, they could be killed. Captain Minho, now elderly but still serving, led ground forces on a world called Sanctuary Prime. Millions of refugees huddled in bunkers while void entities prowled above. His soldiers fought building by building, street by street, using weapons that made space itself their weapon. "Sir," his lieutenant reported, "we've cleared the northern sector. Evacuation ships are loading now." "Good, move to the eastern sector. We've got 4 hours before this planet falls completely." "Sir, the Assembly Defense Forces are requesting we help evacuate their military command post." Minho checked the location. It was nowhere near any civilian populations. "Denied. We're here for people, not politicians." "Tell them to save themselves." The evacuation continued. Humanity's ships weren't the largest. They weren't the fastest. But they were numerous and they were relentless. World after world, wherever civilians were trapped, human forces appeared, fought, evacuated, departed. And the whole time they ignored assembly military channels. No coordination. No integration into assembly defenses. They just did their work and moved on. After 6 weeks, the dimensional crisis reached its peak. 3 major assembly worlds were falling simultaneously. Billions of lives at stake. The assembly begged for human help to defend the worlds themselves. Not just evacuate them. The response came from an unexpected source, Ambassador Haiyan Wu, now 90 years old and technically retired, accepted a communication from the Assembly Presiding Council. They appeared on his screen, all 7 members, looking desperate. "Ambassador," the Vox representative began, "we know we wronged humanity. We know you have no obligation to help us. But billions will die if these worlds fall. We're begging you." "Not for ourselves?" "For them." Haiyan Wu looked at them for a long moment. His face showed the weight of years. His eyes showed something harder, memory. "I remember," he said quietly, "standing in your chamber 50 years ago. Human colonies were dying. I begged for help. Do you remember what you said?" The council members looked at each other. The Thorum spoke. We said the strategic value was insufficient. We were wrong. You said intervention might escalate the conflict, Hyunwoo continued. You said we chose to settle in dangerous regions? You said risk was assumed. Do you remember? Yes, the Vox admitted. We remember. And we were wrong. Completely wrong. If we could change that decision, we would. But we can't change the past. We can only beg for help in the present. Hyunwoo nodded slowly. You're right. You can't change the past. And neither can I, but I can tell you what humanity will do now. He leaned forward and his expression was not angry. Not triumphant. Just tired. We came not because you called, but because innocents are suffering. We did not need your permission. We did not seek your approval. You remained silent when we needed you. We rose because that is what we do. And now we depart? You're leaving? The council looked shocked. But the crisis will be resolved, Hyunwoo interrupted. Our forces are finishing evacuation operations as we speak. We've saved approximately 4 billion lives. Everyone we could reach. Everyone who wanted to come with us. They're being taken to safe zones outside assembly space. But the worlds themselves are not our responsibility, Hyunwoo said firmly. We will help those who suffer as conscience demands. But we will never again ask you for anything. And we will never again integrate into your systems. Your military. Your government. Your assembly. The Vox tried one more time. But surely after this crisis we can rebuild our relationship. We can be true partners. No, Hyunwoo said simply. We're done. Not in anger. Not in triumph. We're done because we have outgrown the need for your assembly. We will continue to help those who suffer. We will trade with those who deal fairly. We will defend ourselves and our interests. But we will never sit in your chamber again. We will never debate for weeks while people die. We will never wait for your permission to do what's right. He stood, despite his age making the movement slow. This transmission is ending. Our forces will complete their operations and withdraw. We wish you luck with your crisis. But humanity's involvement ends today. The screen went dark. The Assembly Council sat in silence. Outside their chamber, the dimensional crisis continued. Human forces completed their evacuations over the next week, then departed as promised. They left behind reality anchors and weapons caches for those who remained to defend themselves. They left detailed instructions on how to fight the void entities, but they left. The assembly fought on. They adapted. They learned. Slowly, desperately, they pushed back the incursion. It took 5 years, but they survived. Battered, diminished, but alive, and through it all. Humanity remained apart. In the decades that followed, humanity became something between legend and mystery. They appeared when disasters struck, saved who they could, then vanished. They traded when it benefited them. They shared knowledge occasionally. But they never rejoined the assembly. They never explained themselves. They never asked for recognition. The assembly chamber where Hyunwoo once stood remained mostly unchanged. His old podium was still there, empty. Some younger species, recently admitted to the assembly, asked why it wasn't reassigned. The elder species knew. They kept it empty as a reminder. A lesson. A warning carved in absence. When you dismiss someone, don't be surprised when they stop asking for your approval. And don't be surprised when they exceed you anyway. Humanity didn't conquer the galaxy. They didn't destroy the assembly. They didn't seek revenge. They simply rose above those who had looked down on them. They built a civilization on their own terms, helped others when conscience demanded, and lived free from the approval of those who had once thought themselves superior. The assembly remained. But it remained diminished, reminded daily by an empty podium that some things, once lost, can never be reclaimed. And humanity? They were out among the stars, building, growing, creating content to live without the assembly's recognition, because they had learned the most powerful lesson of all. The only approval that truly mattered was their own.